I'm Marilyn Heron. I'm with the Disability Services Office here at TSTC. Wanted to talk to you a little bit about disability services and what it includes while you're here in the college campus. The first thing I want to talk to you about is the law and what covers us in terms of disability services. Most of us remember the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed in 1990. It was amended in 2008, and now the Americans with Disabilities Act is the Americans with Disabilities Act and Amendments Act of 2008, and we call it the ADAAA. Because of the Amendments Act expanding the number of people that can be protected from being discriminated against, the number of students coming to every college in the country and to a 2-year technical college has expanded a great deal. Our population at the school has increased dramatically in the last 4 to 5 years. Because of the Amendments Act, there are more people protected from being discriminated against. Consequently, we have more students using disability services statewide and nationwide at every college. I wanted to talk to you about how a student goes about getting accommodations from a college and the process that we follow here at TSTC. A student will request accommodations, and what happens at that point is we get documentation of the student's disability, and then based on what we receive from a doctor, psychologist, psychiatrist, mental health professional, or their high school, we begin an intake conversation with the student, and we discuss possible accommodations based on their disabilities. Out of that, we prepare accommodation memos, letters of accommodations that go to the student for them to give to each of their instructors. So the student signs off on that letter of accommodation, the disability office signs off, and so does the instructor. So when you receive information on a disability accommodation letter that says the student is allowed these accommodations, you're legally required to provide them. You cannot change those disability accommodation memos or letters. Those are legal documents for the student to have and for you to follow. So please do not change them. After the student gets their accommodation memos to you as an instructor, you need to follow those as we've said. Then the student brings those back to the disability office and we have them on file. Every semester that a student wants accommodations, they have to request them. And so every semester we go through a similar process, but we don't have to get all the documentation again because we already have all that. So it's a little faster after they've come through the first time. If a student self-discloses to you as an instructor or as a staff member that they have a disability, you need to inform the disability office. And each of those offices need to follow up with that student at least twice. So an example would be a student tells somebody in the financial aid office that they have ADHD. The financial aid office should send an email to the disability office and let them know that the student self-disclosed a diagnosis of ADHD. And that can be for any faculty member that hears this, any staff member that hears this. We need to follow up at least twice to find out if the student wants to receive accommodations. So just remember to do that if a student self-discloses a disability. The other issue that's occurring nationwide right now is service animals and emotional support animals. So I brought a couple of friends along, and we're going to talk about service animals first. Now, only dogs, service dogs, and service miniature horses can be considered service animals. These are the only two animals allowed in public in any location. Service dogs, service miniature horses, not Shetland ponies, miniature horses. These are the only two animals that can be considered service animals. Service animals that come into a public setting, a college or any place else, there are only 2 questions that you are legally allowed to ask under the Department of Justice. The two questions are, do you have this service dog or service miniature horse because of a disability? And then the person would say yes. And the second question you're allowed to ask is, what task is it trained to perform? So the student might say, I have diabetes, it recognizes low blood sugars, it recognizes high blood sugars. The student could say, I have epilepsy, it recognizes seizures prior to them occurring and makes me safe. Another area of growth is students with PTSD. They have PTSD service animals that protect them from somebody coming up behind them. So service animals are only allowed to be dogs, service dogs, and miniature horses. And anybody with a service animal knows the rule, they know the law. So they will know the two questions you're allowed to ask. Now, we'll flip over to emotional support animals. Emotional support animals are growing nationwide at every college. So those are students that come to college and say that they have an emotional reason to have that animal. And those animals can be anything that has to be vaccinated. So like you wouldn't have a tarantula as an emotional support animal. It cannot be vaccinated. It also has to be allowed within the city and county. So emotional support animals have to check in, and those students have to check in with the Disability Services Office. We keep tabs on emotional support animals to verify the need for that emotional support animal. Service animals do not have to check in with the Disability Services Office, only emotional support animals. The other thing about an emotional support animal is they can only be in the student's living quarters. That's it. So if you see a student with a cat in your class, that's not a service animal because it's not a service dog or a service miniature horse. It most likely is an emotional support animal, which can only be in that student's living quarters. So it's just something for you to be aware of. But students with true service animals, we've had, in the time that I've been in this office, we've had 4 in the last 4 years. The rest are emotional support animals that stay in the living quarters of students' dormitories and apartments. So if you have any questions about disability services, any concerns, please call the Disability Services Office that serves your campus. And please let us know if you have any questions. And welcome to TSTC.